Richard Allen has been found guilty of murder for the deaths of Abby Williams and Libby German in Delphi in 2017. Thanks for joining us for this final Delphi debrief here on WTHR+. In a moment, you'll hear reaction from our WTHR legal experts, Katie, Jackson, Lindsay. But let's begin in Delphi, where our team heard that verdict in court today. Bob Siegel and Emily Longnecker are there for us right now.
Scott, this was a day that the families of Abby and Libby have been looking forward to for a long time. We know that it's been a long road here, not only, for the last 7.5 years since these girls were murdered, but in particular the last 2 years since Richard Allen was arrested, and the last 29 days since jury selection started, this process of assembling a jury to review all the evidence, to hear all of the testimony in this case. We've done that over the last 3+ weeks, and today, Emily,
today's the
guilty.
day. Today is the day.
Yes.
Yeah, today's the day. That's a phrase we've often heard the family say in the past 7.5 years when these girls first went missing and then were discovered, and for 5 long years it was, today is the day we're going to have a break in the case. Today is the day we're going to have a suspect. And then 5.5 years in, they had an arrest of Richard Allen, and now 2.5 years later, here we are, and today is a day that this family, both of these families, feel like justice is served. Today is the day.
So the jury came back after 4 days of deliberations. They were inside the courthouse during those deliberations, between 19 and 20 hours of time that they took. And there were 4 counts against Richard Allen. Felony murder of Abby Williams, felony murder of Libby German, and then a count of murder involving Abby, and the murder of Libby. Guilty, 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 guilty. Those are the 4 verdicts that came down today, and we want to walk you through what happened in the courtroom. WTHR 13 News, we were fortunate to have one of 12 media credentials to be inside the courtroom. So today I had a chance to be in the front row of the gallery in the courtroom, about 15 feet right behind Richard Allen when the verdict was read. And I can describe to you what happened inside the courtroom. I guess we'll backtrack just a little bit because it was around 1:30 today again. Everyone, I think, starting to wonder, is this going to be a hung jury? Is this going to drag out? But around 1:30, we started to see some motion outside.
Right. We saw family. We saw the victims' families. We saw Abby and Libby's families crossing the street here and entering on the south side of the courthouse in that way. And so we knew, or we thought, hey, something might be going on. We saw the drone go up. We did not, interestingly enough, you didn't, I didn't, our producers did, no one saw Richard Allen coming in, and that's something that we usually knew to spot when he was coming in. We didn't see that, I didn't see that. Then if you went outside the courthouse, we all started to kind of gather outside the courthouse. There were big crowds forming. The folks that had the media passes, they were lined up ready to go. If they got called in, they were going to call the media in first, then members of the public, people that we've seen for weeks camped outside the courthouse to wait to go in and hear testimony each day. They were all there, ready to go, should they come out and say, okay, we have a verdict. And, we had been told ahead of time that police wanted this to be very orderly going in. There wasn't going to be any running and racing towards the door. They were going to do it very orderly, and that's actually what ended up happening. It was very orderly.
So I got inside the courtroom at about 1:40 this afternoon, and when I got there, Richard Allen was already in the courtroom. The families of Abby Williams and Libby German were inside the courtroom at that point. There was a huge police presence, about 25 uniformed officers and plainclothes officers around the perimeter of the courtroom on the inside. The attorneys, most of them were in there at this point. Interestingly enough, the only folks who were not in there as we started getting closer to the verdict was the family of Richard Allen. In fact, when Judge Gall came into the courtroom, she looked at the defense table and said, where is Mr. Rosie? And at that point, Andrew Baldwin notified the judge that he was downstairs with the family, with Kathy Allen and with Janice, Richard Allen's mother. So once they got up into the courtroom, at that point, the judge announced that she wanted to make sure there were no outbursts whatsoever in the courtroom. She wanted things, she said, for Mr. Allen, for the victims' families, we need this to be very orderly. And she said this before the jury was brought in. She said, "This has been a long haul. Regardless of what the verdict is, some people aren't going to be happy." And at that point, she asked everyone in the courtroom that if you're not unhappy, take your unhappiness outside, is what she said. So again, wanting to make sure, we had a pretty good sense at that point that there was not going to be any huge outbursts. She said if there had been any outbursts, folks would be escorted out of the courtroom by law enforcement, and that did not happen. At this point, the jury was brought in, and the jury came in at 2:19 this afternoon. And I got to tell you, in my mind, because this trial has taken 17 days, in my mind, this verdict was going to take a while to announce. Boy, was I wrong on that. I mean, this was so fast. The jury was seated at 2:19. The judge immediately asked if they had their verdict. The foreman of the jury, who was elected, he was juror number 30. He handed the verdict form over to the judge, and by 2:20, the verdict was being read. Guilty, 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 guilty on all 4 charges. And by 2:22, the jury was excused and they left the courtroom. So literally, the jurors were in there for 3 minutes. I want to explain kind of what happened when the verdict was read. Because I was so close to Richard Allen, I was able to look directly at him, and he gave almost no reaction at all. Andrew Baldwin, defense attorney, was sitting right next to him. He had his arm around Richard Allen. Right before the verdict was read, at times he was rubbing Richard Allen's head, which is very close-shaven right now, as he's in the Cass County Jail, trying to comfort him. Very little reaction from the defendant. I was able to see the victims' families off just behind me to the left. And I saw Becky Patty, which is Libby German's grandmother. She was sitting with Mike Patty, her husband. The two of them, she was holding on to Mike's arm. As the verdict was read, the first guilty, I heard off to my left, "Yes!" And I knew that had come, again, from the direction that came from. That was from the victims' families. And when I look back at Becky Patty, she put her head down on Mike Patty's shoulder, clutched him closely, got a smile on her face. A few moments later, she was crying a little bit, emotional. But again, no huge outbursts at that point. I was able to see off to my right, I was able to see Richard Allen's family. They looked angry. His mother and his wife were crying. It was shortly after that Richard Allen looked back at them and he said, "Are you okay?" I didn't see their reaction to that. But for the most part, things in the courtroom were pretty subdued and pretty calm. And Richard Allen was let out in handcuffs. Before that, they had talked about when the sentencing was going to happen, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it was once then the judge and the jurors had left the courtroom, that's when all the emotion really happened. The judge didn't want to see it while she was in there, but as soon as the judge left the courtroom, at that point, the families started hugging and embracing each other. They stood up. They started hugging one another. The victims' families did. State Police, they've been in this for the long haul for the last 7.5 years. Some of the most emotion I saw in the courtroom today was actually from State Police. Superintendent Doug Carter was right in the front row, sitting just to my left. He was sitting there with his wife. They were holding hands. When the verdict was read, I noticed their hands, they grasped each other's hands tighter. Doug Carter put his head down in his hands, and I could see that he was very teary-eyed. He was crying. And the defense team, they stayed very calm and relaxed, almost as if they were expecting this result today from the jury. The prosecuting team, on the other hand, they were embracing one another. Stacey Diener got up. She was hugging some of the investigators, and she was hugging Nick McClelland. And Indiana State Police detective Jerry Holman, who has been instrumental through this case, he actually went over to Nick McClelland, and he hugged the prosecutor and he kissed him on the cheek. Again, just I think relief and a lot of excitement that the jurors came back today with the verdict that the prosecution was hoping for. As far as the defense team, a disappointment, but there will be next steps, and we'll talk about that in a little while as well.
And there we were waiting outside. I mean, I don't know, I feel like at least 100 people, maybe more, waiting outside.
Yeah.
Media, local folks, people holding signs, some in support of Richard Allen, many more, I think, in support of the families of Abby and Libby. And you know, I heard sirens at one point, and I remember thinking, oh, is that Richard Allen coming? Is he coming here? Is he getting a police escort? And I know now, looking back at the timing, that that was probably the jury being taken out of here, I think. But the first indication that I had that something probably had not gone the way that the defense wanted was I saw a man come out of the courthouse very quickly, and he's a man that we came to know would always sit with the Allen family in support of them, a friend, confidant, and he came out shaking his head and just hurried off pretty quickly. And then right after he came out, it was not a minute later, a reporter from Court TV came out, and she had a piece of paper. She was really quiet, and she just held it up like this, and it was hard to see. But so, you know, everybody kind of leaned in. It was this moment, everyone kind of leaned in and got closer, and that's when you saw guilty, 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 guilty. And then, you know, there it was, and people cheered. I mean, people erupted in cheers. And some people, you heard some people not happy, but honestly, that was really, really drowned out by the amount of people cheering that were really happy to see this. So.
A lot of emotion, Scott, in court today, especially in the latter part when the verdict was read, and yeah, some of that emotion spilled outside afterward. We saw the families hugging one another out there, and yes, there was quite a bit of emotion.
I mean, and this, you know, the gag order is still in place, and we learned that. Kathy Allen did come outside, walked past the media, and if we have some tape of her briefly, if we want to just roll that now, that she spoke real quick. If we want to take a listen. So Kathy Allen there crying and saying this is not over at all. And then soon after she came out, Indiana State Police, Ron Galavez, he came out, and we were thinking, okay, are we going to hear some kind of response from State Police? And here's what he had to say. Take a listen.
Judge Gall has not lifted the gag order, so we're not going to be able to make any type of public statement at this point. We'll be looking forward to having something scheduled a month from now following sentencing. So with that, that's all that we're going to be able to say at this time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
And that was it. That was it from State Police, and so there it was. We knew that we were not going to get any kind of reaction from them, at least officially, beyond what you observed in the courtroom. With the happiness there that we saw. Right,
and so as Kathy Allen, Richard Allen's wife, said, this isn't over.
Right.
We know that there are next steps. One of the next steps, the very next step, would be a sentencing hearing, and The judge set a sentencing hearing for Richard Allen for December 20th. There was some discussion about whether they should set aside 1 day for that or 2 days for that. I know the defense said they would probably need about a half a day. They seem to indicate that they could kind of knock out, there's going to be statements from both sides, from both the prosecutor and the state, trying to convince the judge why she should either give a lighter sentence or a heavier sentence to Richard Allen on these counts. And he is facing significant time in prison.
45 to 65 years per charge, correct?
Yes.
And so now
Yes.
will those run concurrent or consecutively? That's the decision there. And you would expect that during that sentencing, you're going to hear about Abby and Libby and who they
Yes.
were as people and their lives lost. They would be 20 right now. Libby had just turned 14 in December before she died that next February. So her birthday is coming up where she would be 21. So these young women, they would be, really just starting adulthood.
Victim impact statements.
Yes.
It has the potential, certainly, the sentencing to be very emotional as well. And then we've gotten every indication from the defense that if there was a guilty verdict, which we got today, that then there's going to be an appeal on the other side, and that can get going after the sentencing hearing.
After the sentence, right? Because then they file an appeal, and then that triggers, it's my understanding, the court reporter to type up the transcripts, everything that we've heard during the trial, and then that's what starts it rolling, right? And then they file a brief, and then they have 30 days to file a brief, and then the state has 30 days to file a brief. So it will be some time before that happens, but we have to get to that sentencing first.
So Kathy Allen is correct in the fact that this is not the end of this whole process.
Right, and we've seen the defense talk about that and try and set that up. We know that there were other alternative theories that they had about how the girls were killed, and alternative suspects that they had wanted to bring into this trial. Judge Gall had ruled no, that's not going to happen, and it didn't. And so here they presented the defense as is, but you have to imagine if an appeal would be granted, that they would try and bring those in.
Yeah. So, Scott, that is the rundown of what actually happened inside the courtroom today and outside the courtroom today. And now there's going to be a lot of discussion about whether this jury, who devoted 29 days, 26 of those days being sequestered from their families and away from their community in Allen County, there will be a lot of discussion and debate about whether or not they got it right. But we do know, as of tonight, Richard Allen guilty on all 4 counts of murder that he faced in the deaths of Abby Williams and Libby German.
All right, Bob and Emily, we'll get back to you there in Carroll County in a moment. Let's get some legal analysis tonight from our legal expert, Katie Jackson Lindsay, a former deputy prosecutor and current defense attorney. Katie's been with us every night as we've been doing a deep dive into this case. What is your first reaction on this guilty verdict?
Well, as an attorney, your first reaction is always respect, because it is what it is and it's final. Processing it and just thinking it through, honestly, I was a bit surprised initially. I think towards the end there, some of the juror questions led us to at least assume that there was some doubt on their part. Some of the conflicts in the evidence between the state's case and the defense case, I think, lended themselves to reasonable doubt on the part of the jury. And then they were out for a little while, and so you started to wonder if they might be able to reach a verdict. So once the verdict came in and we knew what it was, there was a bit of surprise initially, but it is what it is, and that's how our system works. So 100% respect for that verdict.
What do you think the evidence was that was the defining moment for this jury panel, where they said he's guilty?
I think it had to be those confessions. You know, I've said over and over throughout the coverage of the trial and each night that we do this, that it is really, really hard to convince a jury that your client didn't do something that he is saying that he did. And I think ultimately those confessions were the tipping point that got the state over the inconsistencies in the eyewitness testimony and over the fact that there was no DNA and over the challenges with the other forensic evidence. I think it had to be the confession.
So we've got the sentencing coming up on December 20th. Will we hear the families of the two girls come up and give victim statements?
Absolutely. I think we should absolutely expect that, whether we hear from them verbally on the witness stand or whether they decide to submit letters that may be read by the prosecution. But it's important to remember, especially as we bring the focus back to those victims, that the victims have the families of the victims have an absolute right to be heard and to submit victim impact statements. So this judge now has an opportunity to learn about who Abby and Libby were outside of the gruesome details that came across in the courtroom.
What is the likely sentence that Richard Allen is going to face after being found guilty on these 4 charges?
Well, it's hard to say the likely sentence. What I can say is that in that penalty range of 45 to 65 years, the court will start at the advisory sentence of 55. She will increase the sentence for statutory aggravators, so things like some of the facts about the crime that were heinous, the fact that they were children, or anything about the facts that make it just more heinous. But she also can decrease the sentence for statutory mitigators, such as the fact that Richard Allen has no criminal history. And so when you balance how bad this was against the fact that you're talking about someone with limited or no criminal history, it's hard to say what the likely sentence will be, but she'll have a lot to consider, and she'll also have a pre-sentence investigation report that will be prepared immediately to help her in that determination.
Let's talk a little bit about the appeal. What grounds will the defense team have in filing an appeal in this particular case?
Well, when we consider any motion that they have filed prior to trial, all of those hearings that they were requesting prior to trial, anytime any of those things were denied, or they were denied the right to present any evidence. So we heard Emily reference tonight those alternative theories they wanted to bring in about why the girls may have been killed, as well as about other potential suspects. We will see them raise that on appeal, that he was denied due process and not being able to admit those things, or that there were mistakes in her rulings on those motions. Additionally, in most homicide cases, you see an appeal based on insufficiency of the evidence. And so in that case, what the defendant is saying is that there was not enough evidence to convict me. We should absolutely expect this in this case, because we've said from the outset, there wasn't a lot here connecting Richard Allen. So I suspect they'll appeal on those grounds. And then depending on what his sentence may be, they may also appeal his actual sentence. I think we can expect he will not get the minimum, and so we should expect that he'll appeal the sentence as well.
So help us understand the appeal process. They appeal, where would the case then go to, and who would then hear it?
So the case will go to the Indiana Court of Appeals. So a panel of our appellate judges will hear the case, and they will render a decision. The state of Indiana will now be represented by the Attorney General's office. It will no longer be the Carroll County Prosecutor's office. And that panel of judges will hear the issues, and they'll make a decision. If their decision is favorable to Richard Allen, it could be sent back to the trial court. If it's not favorable to Richard Allen, then Richard Allen's team could then appeal all the way up to the Indiana Supreme Court.
Okay, but with the sentencing happening December 20th, this is likely going to take place sometime in 2025?
Absolutely, absolutely, because even if you think of the timeline after the 20th, they have up to 30 days to file that notice of appeal that Emily referenced, which puts the trial court on notice that their court reporter needs to start preparing the transcripts. These transcripts are going to be voluminous. We're talking about every single word of testimony put on paper from this trial.
Right.
And so all of that takes time, and there are deadlines included in the appellate process, but we could see this definitely going into next year.
All right, our viewers know that Bob and Emily have been covering this case since the girls were murdered back in 2017. Bob and Emily, have you been going through this process of being in the court and being our eyes for this big case? What are your closing thoughts tonight?
I'm going to let Emily start with that, because you have been covering this case literally since the night that Abby and Libby went missing on February 13th, 2017.
Yeah.
You've been there pretty much every step of the way in this
Yeah.
whole process.
Yeah. I mean, this is a full circle moment for me as a professional. I was thinking about the families today, how many times they trusted us to let us into their homes and speak with us. I was thinking particularly about learning when I interviewed the Patties. In that first year, they had gotten a puppy in December, the December before Libby was killed. And so just seeing them during this trial and saying, how's the puppy doing? And the puppy's not a puppy anymore. And just you get to know these families, Anna Williams, all of the times that they were willing to speak about the milestones in their daughters' and granddaughters' lives that they were missing. When you talk to them, they watched other kids go to the prom. They watched other kids graduate from high school, and other young people in their daughter and granddaughter's lives, their class reach these other milestones that Abby and Libby were not there for. I think that they've taken this awful, tragic, horrendous, unthinkable thing, and they've built a softball park in the girls' memories. They have had food drives at the holidays in the girls' memories, asking you to drop off food that for food pantries that they've handed out. And so they have taken the worst possible thing that could have ever happened to two families and tried to make a difference with that. And I was thinking about that today. And so just from this reporter's perspective, you feel a responsibility to cover something like this with dignity and with respect and get it right. And so it was important to be able to cover this process as well and to see it through, right? So often we don't get to do the follow-ups and see things through, and so it was important to do that, and I'm thankful that I got a chance to be in this moment, in this experience, as difficult as it was sometimes, and it really was, but not at all what it was like for these families, and it was, they're under this gag order right now, but they have posted some things on social media tonight, and I don't want to bring this up and take the focus back to them. Becky Patty posted this picture tonight on social media a couple hours, and this is that's Libby as a little girl in a superhero cape, and I just thought that this was so fitting because the police have called these little girls heroes, many times more than victims, but heroes, and referenced how Libby had the presence of mind that day to roll on Bridge Guy and capture video of her killer. And police have talked about how that really helped them in this case. And Mike Patty always has said of his granddaughter, she had intuition. She had keen intuition, and she was not afraid to speak up for herself. So she had the presence of mind that day to roll on Bridge Guy, to roll on that man. And I think it's, part of the reason certainly that we're here today. I mean, law enforcement certainly thinks so. So they undoubtedly, those little girls were heroes. And we also heard police say that Libby used to say to her grandmother, she was going to grow up and help police solve crimes. And we heard in that closing statement from Nick McClellan saying, that is exactly what she did here. She helped police solve this crime, and she brought her best friend. She brought Abby along with her. And I think that was so poignant when he said that, and it just kind of, I think, made the hair on my arms, stand up when I heard that, because he couldn't be more correct. And Kelsey Sgt, Kelsey German, Libby's older sister, she went on X and posted this quote. We're going to bring that up here. It says, "Crime is almost always senseless and the justice system imperfect. A guilty verdict does not undo the damage of crime. It cannot bring back the victims." And I think, as we say, these beautiful girls are not coming back, and that's something their families have had to grapple with all these years, and this town has grappled with it. We saw today a sign in a local restaurant that said, Abby and Libby, justice will be served, and that sign has hung up here for many, many years in this community, and it was hanging up today along with, some of the posters that have hung up for years here. Looking for information in these crimes. So this town really was changed from it, and but people, when you talk to people in this town, they want you to know that Delphi is bigger than this awful thing that happened, and that there are good people here, and that they come together, and that they help each other. And certainly we saw that they did that in the search for these young girls. We saw that the night, the day these girls were found, that night. This entire community was in a church just down the road from here, saying prayers and coming together, and we saw that. So this is a community that comes together and has rallied around the families of these two girls. Kelsey also posted, I want to show you this last thing that she posted on Instagram. It shows, you can see Libby and Abby there with their little glow stick glasses, and she posted this: "Thank you for all of your love, support, and prayers. We truly couldn't have gotten here without it. I'll share my thoughts once the gag order is lifted and the holidays pass in December." So we know the holidays are coming up, not an easy time when you've lost someone that you love, and particularly like this. And so these folks are, there's going to be a sentence handed down December 20th, and then here come the holidays. So they're going to, I think, get through that, and every indication that at some point they're going to speak on this. They're going to speak on this. So.
One of the things that really struck me during this trial is the fact that Abby and Libby's families, in the middle of the night, would bring food to the journalists that were waiting overnight to be able to cover this trial, and to the people, many of whom had traveled from all parts of the country to be here to witness this event that happened over the last month. Here you have families that, I mean, face it, it's been 7.5 years, but these families are still grieving every day. And they were coming out to take care of the people who were there to witness this event. That really struck me during this process. And also the fact that the Allen family, Richard Allen's wife, his daughter, his mother, in something like this, that they want to be in court.
Sure.
And for the families to be present, there's no place to hide from all the people and all the interest in this case. And yet they were so gracious and kind and understanding and patient through this process with the hordes of people who had gathered here. And you can certainly, I can feel their pain as well.
Absolutely.
We had a verdict today, but there's no celebration on a day like today. Obviously the verdict went the way that one side was hoping that it would, but there's no real celebration on other side. This is just a horrible event all the way around, and I got to tell you, the respect that I have for these jurors. We were in the courtroom.
We saw, some tough stuff. We saw some tough stuff, and they saw some tough stuff. And as we talked about, these are the things you can't unsee.
Yes.
And so I would imagine that those people that sat on that jury, that there are things that they can't unsee too, and
I think it's got to change.
it does.
I feel changed from being through this experience, and to see the bodies of two teenagers. That's a hard thing to see.
It is.
It's a hard thing to report on. It certainly has to be hard for a juror to sit there and have to be logical and rational and put all these pieces together. So utmost respect for what these jurors went through and giving their time and the civic duty and responsibility that they served is really extraordinary. Before we send it back to you, Scott, one other point that we'd like to make, in addition to seeing Emily and myself and Samantha Johnson on this show every night, the work that Scott, you have done, and Katie Jackson Lindsay, we're the folks that you've seen on air, but behind the scenes, I've counted 20 other people, at least from WTHR, who has made our coverage both on air and on our website, and these Delphi debriefs take place from photojournalists to producers to our digital desk team, other reporters. Even our assistant news director was here for several days, and some of these folks not only helping us to get things on air, but to stand or sit in line
overnight,
all night long,
in the
sometimes
cold,
in the cold
in
and
the rain,
so that we
could have a seat the next day.
Could have a seat. And I am so grateful to all of them.
We both are.
For the team effort that it's taken to be able to do this, and I'm so grateful, again, just the thousands and thousands of viewers that we've had for these Delphi debriefs who have left comments and asked amazing questions and welcomed us into your home to be a part of this. Extremely grateful for that. So on behalf of Emily and myself, we are going to send it back one last time to you, Scott, and our thanks to you and to Katie. And it's been an honor for us to be able to bring you coverage here of the Delphi murders trial. So, Scott, we'll send it back to you.
Yeah, Bob and Emily, you both have done a remarkable job, and I'm so glad that you mentioned the team, because it really has been an extraordinary team effort, lots of people behind the scenes. So thank you for acknowledging their efforts in covering this big trial. So let's bring Katie back in and find out a little bit more about your closing thoughts as you wrap up this particular case.
Sure. So when this first happened in 2017, as a native Hoosier, born and bred, I think this was something that immediately caught my attention, especially at the time. I had been a deputy prosecutor longer than I had been a defense attorney. In 2017, I had only been a defense attorney for 4 years at that point, and I had left the prosecutor's office at the child abuse unit. And so I really wanted justice for these girls. I really wanted justice for these families, despite being a defense attorney, because you just want the system to work, especially a system that I am so ingrained in and is such a part of my life because of my career. And so that's been my hope this entire time, from the point where there was no arrest and the investigation was ongoing to the point where we learned about Richard Allen, all the way through today's verdict. I have always just hoped that our system would work. And one thing I can tell you is that our system is not foolproof. It doesn't always work exactly the way that it's intended, but I think that it's better than any other system out there in the world. And ultimately, it does work. So there are people today who feel that justice was served for them, and I'm grateful for their peace. And there are people today who are going to walk away and feel like the system didn't work and justice wasn't served. And what I can say to that, as a member of our system, as an attorney for a long time now that does this work every day, is that it has a way of working itself out. And so ultimately, I think our system worked. I'm proud of our system. And even if today is not, the outcome that one side or the other expected, there's more to come, and we'll see our system play out, and it'll work how it's intended to.
Katie Jackson Lindsay's done an extraordinary job helping us better understand the process that we have seen over the last 3.5 weeks. Thank you so much, my friend, for being here and helping our viewers through this. That does it for our last Delphi Debrief show. We're going to continue to follow this case for you through the sentencing, which again is on December 20th, and the expected appeal. You can watch all of our coverage here on WTHR Plus and on our website at WTHR.com/Delphi. Thanks for inviting us in.